Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of leaders in pharma and biotech. Brought to you by Singular Talent, making hiring better for organizations involved in drug discovery and R&D. Jonny Finlay is the CEO and founder of LockBody Therapeutics, a Centessa company, where he and his team are developing a new kind of antibody to fight cancer. Jonny talked to us about his career, the principle of radical simplicity, and the relative advantages of big pharma and startup biotech. This week on Careers in Discovery, I'm joined by Jonny Finlay of LockBody Therapeutics. Jonny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the invite. Very happy to be here.
Good to have you, and thank you for coming on. We always start, Jonny, by talking a little bit about the work you're doing now and the things you're involved in today.
Sure.
So tell us a bit about LockBody, tell us a bit about the work you're doing there, and I know you're involved in other bits and pieces as well. So tell us a bit about what you're up to.
That's true. Well, the kind of the potted history of how we got to LockBody is that, around 2016, 2017, we founded a series of little asset-centric companies called Ultra. And at that time, we were really interested in having like completely virtual, single asset-centric vehicles, and we're just using those to explore target space, really, and to engineer therapeutic antibodies that were interesting in that space. And around that time, we were interested, along with half the world, in CD47 as a drug target. It's one of the kind of immune checkpoints in cancer that basically says, don't eat me.
Right.
I'm you. These are not the droids you're looking for. The immune system, even though the tumor cells often look quite screwed up and quite unusual. It's one of those classic upregulated things. And so the beauty of CD47 is that it's a fascinating drug target with fascinating potential and biology, but the actual pharmacology of it is a nightmare.
Right.
It's on almost every cell in the body. Dosing drugs to engage it is incredibly difficult. The tox levels are high. The amount of drug you need to dose all the time is absolutely mind-blowing. So we said this, I'm worried that a lot of this isn't going to work out in the entire field, and what we're doing, we're going to be behind. It's not going to be good enough. So basically what we said was, the inspiration was to say, imagine one could have a molecule where it had the ability to bind CD47, but it could only do it once it was in the correct environment. So basically you want to control the location, the activity, and then the duration of activity of the molecule. And so that's what we set out to design.
I see.
Allowing us to basically dose something that would enrich in solid tumors and then activate once it got there, and stop us from having lots of toxicity, lots of difficulty in dosing, all the things that I just described. And so that started to work out. We were like, wow, it kind of took many, many years of suffering in my entire career, I suppose.
Yes.
Lots of people in the protein engineering space and in drugs for cancer and stuff like that have spent many, many years making these complex molecules to try to address very difficult kind of biological questions, and often those molecules are terrible, right? They look great on paper, in 2D in a biochemistry diagram. It looks great. Then you try to manufacture the thing, you try to use the thing, and it all falls apart.
Yes.
So we took all the desire from the CD47 plus all the years of suffering of going through making every mistake possible, basically, on how to make molecules like this. And I said, right, we ended up using this cheesy term, radical simplicity, to describe what we came up with. An incredibly simple answer to a difficult problem. Because otherwise, what you learn over the years, I suppose, in drug discovery, what many people learn over the years is that it may seem great to have things that impress people by how technologically whiz bang, kind of disco ball, flashing lights, puff of smoke kind of things.
Yeah.
It always makes people impressed. But unfortunately, what that means is that there's a huge number of variables that you don't even know or understand. And so your failure rate goes up massively.
Sure, yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So we wanted something that looked basically just as much as humanly possible like an IgG, just like a standard molecule.
Mm.
And we believe that's what we achieved. And so that's been going kind of from strength to strength. It got more and more exciting. That led to the acquisition of LockBody into Centessa Pharmaceuticals, which brought together a whole series of smaller biotechs into a kind of a larger company. Anybody can see that on Centessa.com. It's all there, including details on LockBody. And so they now are very much enjoying LockBody. We're all very much enjoying LockBody, and we're pushing it forwards. Because what got really exciting was that we suddenly realized if you can do this for CD47 and you can hide it and you can dose huge amounts of it and really, really control the toxicity and really control the location of activity, what else can you do it for?
Right.
And so now we've realized we can do it for almost anything we like
in
the antibody killer engager space for oncology. And so we're really exploiting that.
Yes.
And it's getting very exciting.
I can imagine. Yeah. So almost sort of using the body's environment to switch on the drug.
That's it. That's it. Because tumors have there's a number of ways that tumors obviously get quite radically altered compared to normal tissue. In the LockBody case, it's because they have a tendency to accumulate. They're constantly trying to remodel themselves, right? They're trying to break through normal tissue. They're trying to remodel. They're constantly trying to grow, but they lack oxygen. They lack perfusion. They're constantly trying to break down the matrix around them. So they produce all these enzymes that are very, very carefully controlled in normal tissue, but then quite liberally active in the solid tumor microenvironment. So that's what LockBody exploits.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this idea of radical simplicity.
I'm glad.
I have lots of questions. So first of all, I imagine that it's one of those concepts or one of those principles that, yes, you've sort of struck on it scientifically and in relation to this problem, but I would suspect it's a concept that then starts to be contagious, right? As you look at
it bleeds across everything we do and everything I have done, I suppose, for years. Actually, I hate having large numbers of unknown variables. I hate that. It just leads to failure all the time.
Yeah.
So it's also very much about saying, at least specifically within the LockBody context, it's also about saying, how foreign do we want this molecule to look? We want it to just look like a human protein that just gets in and floats around. We don't want it to look like something, extremely unusual.
Yeah.
As much fun as it might be to make a molecule like that, it's not fun once you get to the clinic.
Yeah. No, of course.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that actually practicing radical simplicity in a scientific context is not that easy, because
no, it's not.
The more you know about something, the harder it becomes, right?
That's absolutely right. It's actually being able to Occam's razor away the things that might be conceptually attractive, but actually only add complexity. Takes an awful lot of discipline. It's actually quite difficult to, especially if you're naturally creative and you're naturally interested in trying to make things work.
Yeah.
Then actually stopping yourself from going off into rabbit holes, is actually a really, really important thing, because otherwise the distractions can be extraordinary, right? We've got to constantly have our eye on the lowest hanging fruit, if you like.
Yeah. And I imagine, in that context, you're working with a team of extremely qualified people, right? And highly educated people. And I was talking to someone yesterday about this in relation to teaching, actually. And we were talking about this idea of thresholds and the fact that once you know something, particularly from a technical point of view, once you know something, it's hard to then remember what it was like before you knew it.
Correct.
I imagine that comes into play there as well.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And I mean, I think, you hear people talking about these things in kind of poetic, with a lot of poetic license, but it is true that if you can't kind of prioritize, rationalize, and simplify, then actually the low-hanging fruit is probably the only thing you're ever going to get to. You know what I mean? People, you hear people from other companies talk about how do we get to the high-hanging fruit? How do we get to the difficult stuff?
Mm.
And that's really what's on our mind. What we're trying to do is extraordinarily difficult, right? And so the only way to guarantee that you can understand your way through the process is through removing as much noise in the system as possible.
Right.
And it's the only way you can achieve linearity to wherever you want to get to is by understanding that you haven't built in a whole load of unknowns.
Yes. Yeah. I could ask you about this for the entire interview. I'm trying to stop myself from doing that.
Yeah, no, it's like,
we can get into your career. The other thing I was interested about was obviously, so you started LockBody as a standalone startup biotech company. As you said, you had other projects you were working in as well, and then went through this acquisition process. How has that changed your role as the CEO? What's that been like going through that transition?
It's changed it to a certain extent. Actually, it's been great. It's been kind of interesting to have. So that when I was in large pharma, right? The beauty. What is the beauty of large pharma? The beauty of large pharma is muscle power. Right? Mm-hmm. If you get the support, which is rare within large pharma because everybody wants the support, and so everything is subdivided to the nth degree. You know, salami sliced out of existence. If you get the support in large pharma, the muscle power is extraordinary. Right? Yeah. And you really can move mountains if you decide to do so, as we've seen with the vaccine pushes and all that kind of stuff recently. But in a more minor sense, for whatever it is that you want to do, if they really get behind you, it can be a bit of a rocket ship. Mm-hmm. That is harder to achieve for a virtual, small biotech. That transition to the rocket ship with huge power and enormous investment, etc., is more difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
And so when something like Centessa comes along and says, listen, we'll amalgamate we'll amalgamate these companies that do not have associated risk and pull down a big bolus of capital to allow us to drive these things much more aggressively to the best possible endpoints. Pretty attractive, you know?
Yeah.
And so, how it's changed things for me, I suppose, is on the one hand, it's been good in that it's meant that we can, accelerate, expand, pull in more people, get more great people involved in the company, and also have fantastic influences. You know, that there are some extraordinarily experienced and helpful people in Centessa.
Yeah.
You know, you've got, the CEO, Sarab, has many years experience in oncology. Antoine Ver, developer of Enhertu and other things, is in Centessa. David Granger, hugely experienced in drug discovery into the clinic, et cetera. See people, great. Medical people, great, project management and all that kind of stuff. And so it provides this complete groundswell of acceleration.
Yeah. I suppose in the interest of that acceleration, I guess the difference between that and as in an acquisition or being part of a larger company and just raising a lot of money is that there's already process and know-how and institutional knowledge, right? So, yes, you could go and raise, let's say $250 million, even if you raise that much money, right? You'd still have to build the team and build the system.
Yeah, you have to build the same team. Yeah. It really doesn't change much in that sense, and to a certain extent, a lot of that was taken care of. Which is kind of attractive in itself.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So let's go right back to the beginning, Jonny. And I'm sure we'll come back to LockBody, I'm sure, as we go along. But I always like to start at the very beginning.
Sure.
For you, because you trained as a microbiologist and biochemist, if I'm
that's correct. Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Why science for you? Why microbiology and biochemistry? Why drugs and therapeutics? Tell us about the origins of this career for you.
Sure. Um, well, I was one of those classic, extreme nerd kids who had a chemistry set and was
Mm.
super interested and had like little science magazines and stuff like that as a child, and and luckily was kind of pushed to stay interested in it
Hmm.
by my mother in particular, you know, because of course I went through discovering punk rock uh, and skateboarding and drumming, and decided that of course I didn't want to do those desperately uncool things,
Yeah.
until I got to but I was desperate to get out of Northern Ireland at the
Right.
time. I was growing up around Belfast in the middle of the bad old days. It was a mess, and
Mm.
funnily enough, my big idea was to go to Glasgow, which is like, you know, it's it's radically different, but it has a lot of the same problems.
Sure.
But but um, but so the attraction really for me was to get out of Northern Ireland, actually, more than to follow the science. The intrinsic love of the science was always there,
Hmm.
but I was distracted by other like teenage kid things.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it was, and people kind of laugh whenever they hear this now. People are like, are you for real? Because we're kind of all of us surrounded by straight A students, right?
Hmm.
All the time. I absolutely was not.
Right.
I loved the science, but I didn't study.
Okay.
And so actually in the first year at university, I failed all my exams,
Okay.
literally everything. Didn't pass a
Wow.
single thing. And then was my dad, being quite astute, decided to make me come to grips with the real world and made me work on a building site for the summer.
Right. Okay.
I was basically carrying heavy things all day and being treated like a performing monkey. And
Uh-huh.
I was like, maybe I should give it a go. So I went back. Aced all the exams, went into the second year, started to really enjoy it, and
Yeah.
then by the end of the fourth year of the degree, I was one of the decent students and was being recruited to do a PhD. So, it kind of it only really blossomed for me once I really got my teeth into it.
Yeah.
Once I really started enjoying it, you
I
know.
find dads can be very effective with that sort of stuff when they finally get the green light, usually from the mum, to actually put their foot down and
That's right.
make a point.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that then it just took off. I became utterly
Mm.
obsessed. Really, 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 really obsessed. And the I always remember the university lecturers in Glasgow were like, "Who are you?" I remember you in first year. You were an idiot, and but then things went well during my PhD. Published a lot, traveled a lot, presented
Mm.
a lot, and then kind of blagged my way into a postdoc at the FDA,
Mm.
Washington D.C.
Which must have been amazing.
Was fascinating, like hugely, hugely interesting,
Mm.
and it kind of means that to this day I have a slightly different viewpoint on certain things than some other people in the industry, in the sense that I know what it's like for the people in the FDA. I've spent all day, every day with them for years.
Yeah.
And you hear the water cooler chat, and you understand exactly what it is that they're going through, and the important job that they're doing. So
Mm.
it was academia, then US government, and regulatory. Even though I wasn't doing regulatory work, I was
No,
I
sure.
was a postdoc, and then left there because I really wanted to come back to Ireland, and had a brief postdoc in Dublin, which but the whole time I was kind of more focused on, at that point I'd started focusing on antibody engineering and thinking about all that kind of stuff, but I was mostly focused on diagnostics, and I was always jealous of the people in therapeutics, right?
Right.
Because therapeutics is where frankly all the cash is.
True. Yeah.
That was where people were doing the highest level of work
Hmm.
in the protein engineering and in the molecular discovery work, and so I was always jealous.
Mm.
And at that time, the possibility came along to help like found the what was at that time the Wyeth Biologics Drug Discovery Group
Yeah.
in Dublin, which I leapt at. I was like, this is my opportunity. Jumped into that. We ended up working in that for nearly 12 years. And that was the creation of that group, which then the whole thing, of course, Wyeth got acquired by Pfizer. And we went from 2 people to 25 people over that time, and built it out to be quite a well-known group. So
yeah,
it was great. That's why I ended up working with Orla Cunningham, who's now part of Ultrahuman 8 and Granular, etc. And so when we were towards the end of that, I was starting to get the kind of corporate waterboarded effect, you know, that people often do in large pharma, where you're just like, this is exhausting and
yeah,
extremely pigeonholed, and the only option, you know, open to me next was to basically move into a role where I was basically going to become a politician, you know. And I was like, this is not what I want.
Yeah.
My mother, I also couldn't, because I was in a certain section of Pfizer, you know, you basically you can't get out. You can't work on it, or you can't work on other things. And the people who are in the areas that you wish you were working in will basically say, stay out of my lane.
Right.
And so I wanted to work in oncology. I wanted to flex those muscles. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to get out. And the inspiration was that my mother was dying of triple negative breast cancer.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I mean, I don't have any kids. I don't have a car. I don't have a mortgage. I don't even have a dog. Luckily, I have a very understanding wife. I'm going to walk. And I literally, I walked from Pfizer. And luckily then, people at Medici, Kevin Johnson, John Edwards in particular, were amazingly helpful in saying, okay, listen, you might be a lunatic, or you might be onto something. Here's some seed cash, and let's find out whether you have the chops or not.
Yeah,
that's when we started finding the companies.
I see. So I want to come on to those early days, but a couple of things I wanted to ask you about as well from what you've just talked about. So you talked about working at the FDA. And as you said, not necessarily involved in the regulation itself, but being around that environment and picking up some perspective from that. What in particular do you think you learned from that experience that you've kept with you?
I think the absolute genuine honesty in the feeling at the FDA that they really, really genuinely are the thin blue line, right? And I'm sure it's the same as at the EMA and in other places. You know, they're under constant verbal political attack from what I would kind of think of as real industry, the people trying to make real drugs, but also the quacks and the people who want to put, like, you know, homeopathic nonsense into like real pharmacies and all that kind of stuff. They're under attack from them, and often they're under attack from politicians who don't like what they're doing on one thing or another. They're trying to cut their funding. They're treating them, you know, pretty badly. And so it's really fascinating to see them constantly trying to be scientifically rigorous, correct in their assumptions, correct in their decision making, and to stay outside of the political environment.
Yeah.
You know? So it's really, it's actually kind of, I find it all very inspirational. I didn't want to do it for a living. That's the funny thing. I didn't want to. I actually got offered. My boss at the time was like, "Do you want to stay? Eventually take on a regulatory role and all that kind of stuff." I was like, yeah, no thanks. I want to go and try and do other things, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fascinating and kind of inspiring place in that kind of sense. You know?
I think you're right. I think people don't always see it from that perspective, in that they see it as the people who say no, right? And
that's right. People see it as a frustrating
hurdle. Yeah.
Difficulty that and a necessary evil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas in reality, they're only there. It's no less necessary and evil than peer review or
Right.
something like that. You know what I mean? They are quality control.
Mm.
You know what I mean? For safety in particular. And so somebody has to be.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
I know, I've spoken to a few people who are not necessarily at FDA, although one or two of them were, but at regulatory bodies in general, and some in senior positions. And what I noticed was that they want new drugs to come to market. They
Oh,
want
very much.
healthcare to improve, and they want medicines
Yeah,
to be better. They
without
just want it
question.
to be safe.
That's all. Yeah. Safe and effective. That's all they care
Mm.
about. And safe first. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, that's why the agency was created in the first place, right? It
yeah,
was predominantly about safety. And so they yeah, I completely agree. Like, people in the FDA are human too. They have they themselves or their families or loved ones, they suffer from diseases and all that kind of stuff, and they want to see cures and treatments as much as the rest of us.
yeah. No, absolutely.
They're not just killjoys, basically.
Yeah. No, no. But as you say, they take their role very seriously as well, right? And so they should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And so should we, you know.
yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, and then the other thing I was interested in was so you've been on both sides of the fence with this now in
Yeah,
working in a very big company,
right.
and starting a company from the ground up, right? And
Yeah.
there are different environments and different pressures come with that, and
Mm,
it's a different proposition. Although there are some similarities in the work that you do, I would imagine. But one of the things that we encounter in the recruitment that we do is that we will often work with companies who are maybe academically founded or maybe founded by people who've only worked in small companies, and they often get to the point where they want to bring in people who've come from more established companies to bring
mm,
more rigor and professionalism. And
right.
I think that the sort of the feeling is that if you've worked for a big company, it doesn't have to be as big as Pfizer, but
Yeah.
the bigger companies, that there's a that you learn to do things properly and you learn to do things thoroughly and you learn to do things in the correct way. What was your experience
No
of that?
question. That's absolutely true.
Mm,
Wyeth and Pfizer were, I try not to say anything negative, or too negative, you know what I mean, other than, the matrix effects that are inescapable in large
sure.
organizations. Those matrix effects are the problem in those
Mm,
large organizations. But they're always there, packed full of some of the most extraordinarily bright, experienced people in the world, and
yeah.
incredible places to learn. Like I can't even begin to explain the amount that I learned by being at Wyeth.
Mm,
It's like it absolutely and utterly altered my worldview, and taught me everything that I try to apply today. You know.
yeah. You've provided me with an excellent link there to my next question, Jonny. So thank you very much
Oh,
for
okay.
that. So with coming from that environment then, and from the previous experience that you'd had as well in your postdocs and what you'd learned along the way, you then went into this venture with Medici backing you, as you say,
Mhm.
and starting these organizations. In those early days, I suppose, what were the things that I'm sure there were things that you were very clear that you wanted to do in a certain way and very clear that you didn't want to do in a certain way.
100%.
What were those things? And then what were your memories of those early days of stepping into a startup environment?
I mean, it was pretty incredible.
Mm,
You've gone from one of the largest pharmaceutical organizations in the world, a large team, and you know, secretarial support and all that kind of stuff, to all of a sudden you walk into an empty office and you
yeah.
think, should probably buy a laptop, you know.
Yeah.
And I wonder who takes the bins out. Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's really, 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 really like extraordinary gear shift.
Mm,
And some people can't handle that. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Some people very much feel that their personal self-worth is tied to the size of the organization they're in, right?
Mm,
And that if you separate those two, you're somehow bereft. There are some people who can't get out of bed in the morning if they don't have 40 reports.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And in that case, then startups are not for you.
Sure.
you know. In my case, I saw it as exhilarating and tremendously liberating, because the beauty of it is that you actually get to walk in and say, okay, how am I going to do all the things that I learned that were great, and how am I going to avoid all the things that I think were mistakes or limitations?
Yes.
And so I think that's what you're getting at. And I think the biggest, the number one, I was at a, sorry, let me just go on a slight sideline here to be illustrative. I was at a meeting recently with people much more experienced than me, and somebody said very astutely, killing projects is a good thing if they need to be killed, but sometimes it's murder, right? And the one thing that I wanted more than anything else was to be able to follow the science to its logical conclusions and avoid the death of good ideas on the basis of politics.
Right.
Right. The enormous problem with large organizations is everyone's under such enormous pressure to make change. The matrix effects greatly restrict your ability to affect any change.
Right.
And so the guys at the top keep moving, keep leaving, and they'll go to the next gig and the next gig and the next gig. And so every 3 or 4 years, the big guy gets whacked. Another guy comes in to shake things up.
Yeah.
And what actually happens is just complete chaos. And then there's another round of culls of things that they personally just, it doesn't fit with their personal desire for where they would like to see their section of the company go. I'm sure you've heard that 100 times. And so that avoiding that is absolutely critical, I think, to be able to allow things to come to maturity and to allow you to understand, is this conceptually exciting or should I kill it? And we have killed lots of things. There were lots of things that we started where we were just like, no, rubbish.
Yeah.
Stop. But knowing in your heart of hearts that something could be phenomenal and it gets killed because of politics is soul destroying for anyone who's a creative individual or a very heartfelt, deeply passionate scientist.
Yes.
Seeing something get killed on the regular, as they would say, as the kids would say, purely because of internal machinations is, exhausting.
Yeah.
And so trying to explore things in a rigorous way, but without those influences, is the biggest attraction, I think, to starting something from scratch.
And I suppose thinking about that, I guess to your point around the dynamics of sort of, changes in the executive team at big companies and what that entails. And as you say, in that big matrix environment, making little tweaks isn't going to make a big difference, right? Because the ripples will just disappear. You have to make these big dramatic changes, just decisions and there's a lot of pressure to have impact if you come in as the CEO or come in as whatever.
Absolutely.
Whereas, I know I've seen this in our company as well. In a small organization, you do have to make some dramatic decisions and big decisions, and you have to, stick your line in the sand at some things. But from there, those occurrences are kind of period. They're not every day. They happen every now and again. But most of the time, it's about tweaking things, right, and sort of gently nudging things in the right direction. Which
optimization,
yeah. And I guess you spend a lot of time, especially when you have teams, you spend a lot of time just letting them get on with stuff. And that is just a different. You should, yes, yeah, you should.
You should stop yourself from unfortunately, not everybody does, but yeah, you should. Unquestionably, you should let them breathe. Yeah.
I used to work for a guy who he had a really good policy about this. He was the CEO of the company, and he decided that if he didn't feel he was doing something valuable, he'd go home, because otherwise he'd just find things to do because it was his
Right.
company, and he, you get involved,
Right.
don't you? And you get involved in things that you shouldn't necessarily get
Yeah,
involved
you
in.
may
So
actually be disruptive. Yeah.
yeah, so he'd just take himself home, which I thought was a really good policy. um,
Makes sense.
yeah, I don't 100% know where I was going with that, but it's just an observation from what you're saying about the difference in dynamic, really.
No, it's true, and I think there are layers of um, people being allowed to run and to exploit their own experience without external or hypothetically higher influence,
Mm-hmm.
or at least not constantly. You know what I mean? Because I think at times the presence of certain individuals, we always have in our minds, is that individual thinking about what we're thinking about, or are they thinking about whether or not they should fire me?
Right.
Right. And once you place that into an environment where it should be free thought and driving towards a common goal, you can actually distract and alter people's behavior.
Mm.
And that's not necessarily positive.
No, they start playing safe, right?
That's it. People start playing safe. And, that level of, again, that's another unfortunate matrix effect of large organizations a lot of the time, is that they drive conservative thinking due
Mm-hmm.
to fear and desire for self-preservation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a inescapable element, especially if you're in a country where, you know, not naming any specific country, but if you have employment at will, right?
Right.
Then a lot of people are very scared to get fired at a moment's notice, right?
Yes.
And so covering of the gluteals is a very, very common event, rather than making decisions that are actually for the best of the company and for the best of
Mm.
right.
Mm. Yeah, and I suppose, as you go further up the tree, right, there's less jobs available outside of that company, and there's less
Indeed.
companies you could go
Yeah.
to, and
Yeah,
probably your expenses have gone up, and all
exactly.
your commitments go up, don't they? So yeah, no, it makes sense.
And so
Um,
that's why I
fun.
was kind of in an interesting position, in that
Mm.
I had not optimized my life towards extreme dependency.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'd
Yeah.
done the opposite. I had optimized my life to be able to do whatever I liked,
Mm-hmm.
whenever I liked.
Yeah.
And that's easy to say. It's not that many people are not in that position, and I find myself
Mm-hmm.
very lucky to be able to make those quite radical decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always risk involved, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, as you say, you can, if there's risks you can control, then you should,
that's it.
in that situation, because there's always
That's
going
it.
to be other risks that come up. And
Yeah.
so you've been on this journey with LockBody and your other projects for, I guess, just over 5 years now.
Yeah,
Um,
LockBody itself actually has been a bit of it's one of those funny things that, once it came together, it just kind of exploded, because
right.
we spent a lot of time kind of staring at CD47 and thinking, oh, the hell am I going to do with this? You know what I mean? And LockBody proper and the concept only started to coalesce about 2.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been very, very fast since then.
Yeah.
Like we aim to have a molecule in the clinic early next year. We've got,
Wow.
we've got a lot going on, so it's been a very, very rapid mushroom effect now.
Yeah. Interesting. And so over that time, whether that's over the last 2.5 years or over the sort of period as a whole, um, what are the things you've particularly learned, do you think, Jonny? And if you were doing this whole thing again, if you were back in 2017, starting out on this path, what advice would you give yourself at this point, do you think?
Oh, probably be more bold.
Okay.
And even though some people, I suppose, would say, if you could be a bit less bold, that would be nice, please. um, I think probably be even more bold, and even more incisive. It's easy to say in retrospect, I suppose, I wish I had been more decisive there. I wish I'd made a quicker decision
Mm.
or else. But at the same time, I suppose ultimately, when you're trying to do things this technologically challenging, a certain amount of organic understanding has to come together and has to coalesce,
Right.
like I said, before you can actually break the problem.
Yeah.
So, but also, it's been my first time dealing with, because like I said, it was academia, understood that environment, then moved on. Then I'm in in US government, start to understand that
Mm-hmm.
environment, then move on. I'm in pharma, start to understand that environment, then move on. And so
Yeah.
this is the first time, this is the first period in my career, I suppose, where I've been dealing with investors and venture capital, private
Yeah.
equity, that kind of stuff. And I wish I was literally talking just like 2 days ago to Orla Cunningham about this, actually. And I said, um, I wish I had a faster on ramp. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
my personal growth is always hockey stick shaped.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think my lag phase of understanding is longer than I would prefer.
Right.
And then or at least that's how it feels. And then it feels like there's a sudden exponential, you know what I mean? Oh, I get
Mm.
it, right? And I wish I could, if there was anything, I probably would have invested much, much, much more heavily right at the start in understanding those elements of investor philosophy.
Yeah, I see.
But I was just so busy doing the scientific stuff and finding the companies that I didn't really have time, frankly, to do that.
Yeah.
If in retrospect, that would have been nice. But now that I do get it, um, it really helps.
Yeah.
Like how that influences the future and decisions you make and ways you convey things and etc.
I think it's such a difficult balance to strike. I think, if you're doing it right, running a business should be a real push on your own development, and you should be going into
Mm,
areas that you're not sure about or you don't
yeah,
know, you haven't done before,
absolutely.
as you say, if you're not playing it safe, then that's where you should find yourself. But so therefore, you need to invest in your development. But at the same time, especially in a very small company, there's so much that you need to do, and there's so
That's
much
it.
just work to do,
The number of
right?
plates to keep spinning is enormous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And like you say, you have to attend investor meetings and then nip into the lab to make sure something's working, and
That's right.
then deal with some issue that's happened in the building, and
That's right. Take the bins
um,
out.
yeah, exactly. So setting aside that
Try and
time.
hire people, blah blah blah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
you're right. And it's kind of the hardest part, I suppose, is coming to terms with the fact or being cognizant of the fact that you cannot be all things to all men.
Hmm.
Because it kind of self-selects for people who are maybe not overconfident, but willing to try to do almost anything
Right.
to make something successful. You know what I mean? It's intrinsic, it's Darwinian selection for people like that, because people who
Hmm.
aren't like that will not move out of the matrix because they like having their bit of the matrix to be in.
Yes.
That's where they're comfortable and that's fine. Um, and so getting the attraction is to be out of your comfort zone,
Hmm.
but the downside is being out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, I remember when we started the company, I sat down with my wife and said, okay, look, I could be flipping burgers in
Mm.
6 months. That's how this goes. You know what I mean? It could be that this is either the making or the death of my career that I've been working 20 years to build. So be ready.
Yeah.
I may, I will be, there will be dark days. It'll be
Yeah.
difficult. None of this is extraordinarily difficult stuff to pull off. And so I apologize in advance for when I come back like a bear with a sore head and I'm
Mm.
slamming doors and and being a pain because things aren't going well. That is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so luckily she gets it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I find it sometimes. My wife is also very understanding, but you do have days where you come home and there's just no more space, right? There's just no
That's it.
more room for
That's
anything
it.
else.
Yeah, yeah, and you can exhaust yourself very,
Mm.
very easily. I mean, especially if you're a naturally kind of obsessive person, I think everybody gets to a point where there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance, right? Where it's, they will do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, I think is not really true because of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Right? You're like, okay, I got what I wanted, and oh God, now I'm drowning in it. You know what I mean? That happens to everyone at some point, and you have to be ready to accept that.
Yeah.
And to say, I'm going to have to take a deep breath occasionally, step away, just even take a weekend off, go and see your friends, go and see some live music.
Yeah.
Try and forget about it. Don't answer your phone. You know what I mean? And come back refreshed on Monday morning. You know, that having those conscious understanding that going in is kind of important, I think.
Yeah. I think to your point about the kind of people that end up doing this sort of work, it also attracts people who will always look at a situation and look at what could be better about it.
Yes,
I think.
that's right.
And I think sometimes you find yourself in the midst of something thinking about all the things that could be better and not really realizing how far it's come or what the positives are, or actually that you're further ahead than you thought you'd be at that point, because you can see how much further ahead you could be if you'd done this and if you'd done that. Exactly. And that's always useful to remind yourself of, I think.
But it's trying to be charitable to yourself sometimes and saying, okay, yes, if I'd made a quicker decision here or I'd done something better there, maybe I would be further ahead. But also, if I'd made the wrong decision here, we'd be done.
True.
So, trying to remind yourself that, you haven't completely blown it up, which is the alternative. The alternative is you just fail badly.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And you go down in flames. That it's important to understand that you didn't do that yet.
Yeah.
and so keep going,
Yes, I think the yet is important there, isn't
it? Yeah, right. Yeah. Constant vigilance is also necessary.
You've touched a little bit on what's next for you guys. So hopefully heading into the clinic next year.
That's right.
What else is on the agenda over the next 12 months or so?
We're hiring. We're expanding the team. We're doing, like I said, because we've understood now that LockBody is capable of doing so many things. And again, sorry, a thread that I missed to mention. You asked earlier about, how did we end up with this kind of radical simplicity ideas, and I painted a more cerebral picture of it. But it was also the fact that still we're technically virtual, right? We don't have labs. And what we found was that there were no CROs who could actually do the things we wanted them to.
Okay.
Right. So it was okay when I was at Pfizer and I was working with some of the top protein expression purification engineering people in the world. But when we went to small, affordable CROs, they were just like, yeah, that's not possible. We can't do any of that.
Right.
And so that helped to push things into okay, now it forces me to Occam's razor away all of the noise.
Yes.
Just down to so those things came together. Sorry. But because of that, going back to the point about what's next, because of that radical simplicity, because of the modularity and the simplicity of the style of molecule that we've come up with, it basically means that we can expand into many different new tumor indications, and that we can tailor the effector mechanism that we've locked inside the molecule. We can tailor to whatever the biology is of the certain tumor type.
Okay.
There are certain tumor types where you may just want to turn up the heat. You don't necessarily want to throw in a hand grenade. And so in that case, we can change the effector functions. We can go after different tumor antigen classes. We can do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So all of that is going on right now. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we wish you the best of luck with it, Jonny.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all.
Thanks for joining us on Careers in Discovery, and don't forget to subscribe for more insight into the world of drug discovery and R&D. Do take a look at our sponsors, Singular Talent, and their mission to make hiring better for companies and individuals in drug discovery and R&D. You can find them at www.singulartalent.io. See you next time.